Okay, perfect. Oh, I like this one. Somebody else is steering. Okay. Thank you very much for coming today. This is a research development opportunity kickoff. I appreciate that this event is kind of something that research development has done for the last year, and it's to delve into a specific opportunity or a funding opportunity, and allows you to explore that funding opportunity, and we try and bring people who have experience with that opportunity together with the attendees. Next slide. Today, we're going to talk about the NIH Diversity Supplement. Again, that's the NIH number is there. Next slide. Just to briefly go over the agenda. Welcome, my name is Faye Farmer. I have the distinct honor of managing the Research Development Office. I want to give a shout out to LJ, who's managing all of our events and is the master of ceremonies today, really. Keith, who's steering the slides. Jamie and Keith will both be presenting on the program overview. They both are competitive intelligence and research development. Quinn will be presenting on the application materials. He produced some of the materials with our other proposal manager, Jeannie Wilson. Then we'll go over the deadlines roughly, and then we'll launch right into the awardee panel discussion. I want to thank them. A special shout out, we'll get there at the end of this discussion with them, but again, just ASU faculty are very generous with their time, especially during these times, and I want to give them special recognition for participating today. Next slide. And with that, I'll turn it over to Keith to go, or actually, Keith and Jamie, I'm not sure who goes first, to go over the program.
All right, so to start, I'll walk through a little bit of background on the program. So first and foremost, this is a supplement for existing NIH projects, which means that you have to be either a program director or principal investigator on a non-clinical active grant or cooperative agreement. And then the activities proposed for this diversity supplement need to be within the original scope of your NIH supported project. And I'll go into this a little bit more on the next slide, but these supplements are meant to improve the diversity of the research workforce. And so I'll talk about that in the next slide. And then just kind of right up front, I wanted to mention this about these special instructions by each institute and center. And so Quinn will get into a lot more of this later, but I just kind of want to put it in your mind to be thinking that whichever institute or center is your parent grant, they do have specific instructions, due dates, et cetera. So you'll want to check out their guidance specifically. Next slide, please. All right, so as I mentioned on the last slide, the purpose of these supplements is to improve the diversity of the research workforce. And that can include recruiting and supporting high school students, undergraduate students, graduate students, postdoctorates, and even eligible investigators. And so it's a pretty broad range of who can participate in this supplement. But the big kind of thing is they have to be from a diverse background. And NIH has defined what that diverse background is. And so you can see that on the right side of the screen. And then these slides will be sent out later. And so we've added a link here where you can learn a little bit more about exactly what NIH means by diverse background. So definitely check that out as you're kind of figuring out who you'll include in your supplement. Next slide, please. All right, and then just to kind of quick wrap up of the program description. Again, it's fostering diversity in the scientific research workforce. It's designed to provide students research experiences all the way from high school to the faculty level, specifically for those with a diverse background. And then the kind of big thing I thought as I read through the solicitation was this section on how it needs to be integral to the research that you're doing with your NIH Parent Award, and it needs to contribute significantly to the research career development of the candidate. So this is not like a high touch thing. It really is meant to kind of have significant contributions to the research workforce through who you're including in your supplement. Next slide, please. All right, and then just for a little bit of background for how this supplement has worked at ASU, there have been 23 submissions to this program. And 14 of those, so it's about 61%, have been funded, which is a pretty good hit rate. And so you'll hear from those awardees during the awardee panel, and I'm sure they'll give you tons of great advice. So with that, I will pass it over to Keith, who will walk through the NIH landscape.
Yeah, so I'm just giving some background on what NIH has funded broadly. And this shows the history over the last 5 years. where we see a pretty good increase in the number of awards. So based off of 2020 having almost 700, there will probably be about 700 awards this year, and we see a slight upward trend in the amount of awards, which just good background. And overall, an 83% increase in awards over the 5 years. The next two slides will have a lot of data on the right. You don't have to focus too much on that. The big picture is that these awards are tied to the ICs that are funding more. They're tied to the activities that are funding more. So you can get some sense of the average award size by IC, and that may connote more of the type of the person that you're supporting with the award and where they are at in their career and the expertise needed in order to give them the experience that's part of the program. In terms of ICs, NIAID and NIDDK are a little bit lower than others. Don't know why, but generally it runs about like 5% of the awards that they have active. The awards that the IC has made over the last 5 years represent about 5% of currently active awards. It's not the best correlation, but it gives some guidance into how common the ICs grant these awards. And next, when we look at the activities, RO1s are the biggest. They're the most common award given by NIH, so they also have the most supplements. The R21 I would call out as one that, because ASU has a lot of them, is not funded often, and that's because of the time scale. One of the main points of the supplements is that they seek to have like 2 or more years left in the award period, and the R21s are generally 2-year awards, so there's not enough really time to integrate that new project as part of the proposal or as part of the award. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not that it's impossible with an R21, it's just a little harder because of the time scale. And with that, I will turn it over to Quinn for the application materials.
Okay, hi everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces. Next slide, please. This slide looks a lot like the one that Jamie presented earlier, but there's a few things that are a little different here. Again, just reiterating that you need to be a PI on a non-clinical active grant or cooperative agreement. As far as really the eligibility goes, again, just check the list of the institutes on the solicitation. There's also a related notices section that lists a number of different institutes as well with some additional information. But I would strongly encourage, you really do need to contact a program officer for this. So there's a list of the program officers. The contact, the link is actually down there. And that information also comes with institute-specific instructions, the due dates, all that information is actually into a separate document that's kept updated. And I think it would behoove you to also contact your current program officer of your active project. And the question is, can you clarify non-clinical in this context? You know, I am not absolutely sure. They say non-clinical is in the solicitation. That would be, again, I think a really good question to contact the program officer about and determine eligibility on that front. Yes, I would do that. I would do that. Okay, next slide, please. So the funding is quite broad, 5,000 to 100,000. And it really depends on the individual, or in the case of maybe high school students or undergraduates, the individuals that you would be supporting in this. They are looking to cover, you know, they want to make sure that the funds are used for either these new objectives, you know, unanticipated expenses that are coming with bringing somebody on. But again, looking at the solicitation, there's a pretty extensive section that actually describes things for each category of individual that they will or will not fund. So you need to kind of go back and look through that depending on the candidate you're bringing in. Okay, next slide, please. And then really just kind of look at what they're looking for in terms of the research strategy. What they want to make sure is that you are not just essentially wanting to bring on a technician. This is really about, it's sort of akin to the fellowship programs with NIH. It's really about advancing the career of individual or individuals. So they want to make sure that the research activities, and these are research activities of the candidate, are going to be related to some of the project aims, the current project aims. They specify that they want to make sure that this individual is going to be interacting with others that are on the project, that they're going to be contributing intellectually to the research and enhancing those research skills and knowledge. And mentorship is a big part of this. One thing that you should keep in mind as well is that when it comes to sort of the interactions and mentorships, you want to think about going beyond just sort of the scientific career development and be inclusive of the needs that's sort of appropriate to this individual as coming from an underrepresented population. So just some things to keep in mind there. And the other thing I want to emphasize is that in this solicitation, a lot of this, the needs, the sort of requirements are actually described in the review criteria section. So be sure and look carefully at the list in the review criteria that details a lot of what they're looking for. So it's not just in the description of what goes into the strategy, but the review criteria is pretty extensively detailed. Okay, next slide, please. Deadlines. There's not much for me to report here other than go to the link, because each of the institutes has a different sort of detail about when they expect the deadlines to be, or you know, if they're moving or whatever. So again, look at that and contact the program officer. And next slide. And just one thing I want to kind of bring up to remind everyone here is that we do have Meg Bouvier's training information, and whether you use it in completing this or helping the candidate complete this application, or actually using it as part of kind of a training for the candidate themselves, that information is there. And I believe that is it for me. Oh, Faye just mentioned that the code is incorrect. I probably pulled a very old code, so she'll update it before sending them out. Okay, I think that's it for me. Go on to the next slide, and I'm going to turn this over to Faye to introduce our panel.
It works out well because it's a secret code. So
okay.
That was perfect. You did it great. So next I want to pivot to the panelists that we've invited to speak today. So you see them on the slide deck. You can, we're going to go in that order. They've been given prompts to introduce themselves and kind of describe what they have done with this supplement, and then talk a little bit about their candidates. What I am going to actually do, just to keep it equal across across individuals, is I'll kind of give you a heads up when your 5 minutes is up, and then if you don't get through your spiel, that's fine, we can come back. I just want to make sure everybody has time to speak, and then at the end, of course, we'll have a question and answer open to the panel. And with that, I think we'll start with Dr. Booman. Keith, you want to? Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Dr. Booman.
Yes, hi everybody. Thank you, Faye, and everyone for having me for this. So my name is Matt Booman, professor in the College of Health Solutions. So our diversity supplement was funded by the National Cancer Institute, and it was as a the R01 that was associated with is an intervention to reduce screen time in overweight adults, using a multi-phase optimization strategy to develop effective intervention strategies. So I'm actually joined on this by the candidate who got the award. So Christina, hello. So Christina can tell me, maybe she can pipe in at some point and say her side of this. which was much a greater part than mine. So, which is an answer to a question in a moment. So, so Christina's a graduate student, PhD student. And, you know, Christina really led the way in terms of the writing, making sure that all the criteria were met, making sure, you know, reading the FOA very carefully, putting together the application, making sure everything was addressed. We had collective conversations with program officers along the way. I'll just second what Quinn said. Talk to your program officer for your current grant. Make sure they're in the loop. Our program officer kind of said, hey, go talk to Allison Lynn, who is the NCI contact for these diversity supplements, for the nuts and bolts of it, but he wanted to be kept in the loop that things were happening so he could track it through the process. So that was really, really helpful. So definitely be in touch with both, you know, the contact for the announcement as well as your overall program officer. In terms of budget, there's not a lot to discuss with budget because there's not a lot of budget to deal with. You basically, it funds the student. We put remaining budget, which I looked, it's like about $12,000 over the course of the whole proposal. So that depends upon the year and that sort of thing. And there are limits for that, but it's pretty minimal. And we put that into training and travel. So travel to conferences and training experiences for the student. So there's not a lot to do budget-wise. You know, I think that it creates great opportunities and good conversations with your students to figure out what their goals are and how you can help maximize that training program. And you really have to think about, well, how does this opportunity go above and beyond what a student may typically get if you're talking about like a graduate student, what they're typically getting within their graduate program. How is this going to enhance what they're doing and give them new opportunities? So I'll stop there. And if there is another minute or two, maybe Christina, you can just correct my errors.
I think everything you said was correct and accurate. I think the other thing that at least I had to maybe wrap my mind around was what the actual supplement, what it was trying to do. So keeping in mind about the training and then, yeah, the collective effort that did go into it and whatnot. So I would say one thing I tried to do was make sure I understood the purpose of the diversity supplement, made sure that that was apparent throughout the application. And what Matt and other mentors, of course, they're much more skilled grant writers, that was where really they were able to help in that process. So things that came along with that, but yeah, I would agree.
Thank you. At this point, we can go to the next person, and then maybe we'll wrap back around. So the next person is Dr. Langer.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for including me. So we have an R01. It's a multiple PI grant with my colleague at Duke University, and it's from NCI, and it's titled Couple Communication in Cancer, a Multi-Method Examination. So we're looking at the ways in which couples communicate around the cancer experience and looking at communication in multiple ways. So we're in the 5th year, and we finished recruitment of 434 couples. And so I think it was fall 2017, which is the beginning of our 2nd year, my co-PI at Duke came to me and said her dean had approached her and said, so it's kind of maybe a different story here. We've got this postdoc that we want to support. Seems like you have some overlapping interests, and I hear you just have a new R01. So we were kind of like, okay. So then, you know, we spent the next few months getting to know this person, she more than I, of course, and talking with her about crafting some aims. And I think the key thing here, so this really created an assistant professorship for this person who, you know, is now really a rising star in the area. It's been hugely successful. But she was able to craft aims that were complementary to the primary aims of the grant, but unique. And it just so happens that a lot of this was kismet, that we had put a measure in the grant that was something she was really interested in, was able to glom onto that and come up with some innovative aims around that piece. And so she's an assistant professor. developed a mentoring plan. You know, I wrote a letter of support. And one thing I'd say is these are, I don't know if this was mentioned, one-shot applications. So you've really got to get it right and tight it. It's not as competitive as the R01, of course, but you know, there was one point we had gone a couple rounds and it wasn't quite there. We said we're not quite ready. So just make sure it's good enough. And she's been hugely productive. So we're coming up on ending about her 2 years. And I will say something else that she just kind of found out through another conversation. I don't know the details, but we actually got an extension. So there's going to be a 3rd year, and she already got an internal K from Duke, is about to hit on another K from NCI, which she's going to have to give up the other K if that comes through. And she's just been hugely productive. You know, one little example, she attended this research methods and supportive oncology workshop at Harvard. That was a year ago. A year later, they asked her to come and co-host it. She 14 publications, et cetera. So, and I didn't know that we could conclude her today, but I do have a quote. The diversity supplement has had a significant and extraordinary impact on my success to this point. It's afforded me an awesome faculty position filled with meaningful collaborations, incredible training, networking opportunities, and above all else, newfound confidence that I too can have a seat at the table, that I too can play a role in enhancing the lives of patient populations I care so deeply about. It's opened doors for me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. And she talks about Kismet, that it was with 2 PIs. So really nice. And again, we're just basking in the glow of everything that she's done. And I guess I'll just add that our grant, our budget was bigger. I looked, we asked for about 400,000 total for the 2 years, but keep in mind, this is supporting, you know, based on a new assistant professor salary at Duke, plus travel, plus the workshop and those sorts of fees. Have I gone over? I think that's about
No,
it.
you're about a minute. The minute that you tell people that you're timing it, they're quick. Thank you. I think that one of the takeaways for me real quick is that we could definitely do a separate workshop with just interested applicants as well. So my office will take that as a task, and it's a brilliant idea. Dr. Scheibe?
Great, thanks, and really appreciate this opportunity to kind of share some of our collective wisdom, because it is a little bit different. So the grant that, the parent grant, we have an R01 from NIH. It's a community-based diabetes prevention program for Latino youth with obesity and prediabetes. And we were lucky enough and fortunate enough to be able to support Armando Pena, who's a PhD student in our lab on this. So some of the things that were unique to what I've already heard, I'll reiterate, talk to the program officer, and then NIDDK has their own Office of Minority Health. So, you know, they kind of quickly move you there. And that person is a way different, I don't want to call them animal, a way different type of person than the normal program officers, at least in my experience. So very much, they are your advocates and they will help you. They read the grant, ours did, read through the grant, provides as much information as you're asking for. So we had multiple conversations over the phone with this individual, multiple meetings with them, iterations of the grant. So that was kind of one thing that's unique to at least our experience. And the other thing that unique in response to Shelby is we actually went in the first time. So that individual does not, he says, I don't sit on the review panel or anything. The program officer, I don't know how they get reviewed, but they did not fund it the first time around, but encourage us to go back in. So we didn't get a formal, like we didn't really get a summary statement. We got some highlights. They were really interested in the science. And so we had to sharpen our pencil on the science. And then the other thing they really wanted to do was more have a defined training plan with concrete goals. And one of those concrete goals is how are you going to continue to fund this individual after the 2-year diversity supplement is done? Because Armando was, I think, a first-year PhD student when we started it. So we then went back and kind of thought through how are we going to set this, how are we going to set Armando up for an F31? And so we wanted to put that into the career development plan and then carve around that F31. And so we had a mentoring team as part of the supplement, and the mentoring team, in addition to myself, would become the mentoring team the co-mentors for the F31 diversity award that he subsequently got. So it was a 2-year award that then I think, again, the funding, as Matt pointed out, is pretty much, this is what you get. So take it or leave it. And you obviously take it. And then I think about 1.25 years in, we started working on the F31 and making sure that there was preliminary data for that F31, and the F31 took 2 times to get in. So it's kind of like, it's this process. It's just like, you want to create this kind of pipeline, but you also want them to appreciate that not everything gets funded on the first time around. And so that was kind of our experience. The career development plan, one of the most helpful things that we garnered from this was there's a AAAS like career development plan that the candidate fills out, and it identifies their strengths and their weaknesses and then maps out how they build their own capacity. And so we did that, and a lot of it was around going to be trained by other individuals in areas that the local community may not have access to. The other thing they really wanted to make sure is in this context that the applicant got experience in translational research, because we were doing community-based stuff and clinic stuff. That's why I asked that clarification question. It was a clinical trial. So what we wanted to do is make sure that Armando had experience in, not only the clinical side of it, but also as we were working in the community, he would be interfacing with participants and our community partners. So, and I think I'll stop there. Oh, last thing, sorry, signs of strong institutional support and commitment. And so we needed to really develop, hey, anything that isn't going to be funded will be funded in some capacity outside of the funds you're asking for. So, kind of have to pony up some of your stuff.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Stabenfeld. I just want to make a quick point. Dr. Buman might have to leave because he has a prior appointment, but if you have a question for him, I'm sure that you can direct message him or follow up by email if he has to jump off. So Dr. Stabenfeld.
Okay, yeah, thank you for having me today. So I'm a associate professor in the School of Biological Health Systems Engineering. And so my supplement that I received was actually a few years ago. So I received it in 2015, and it was a 2-year supplement that supported a graduate student. And so the grant, the parent award that it was on was actually the DP2, so the New Innovator Award. And so I would say one of the things that, so I was that was in my 3rd or 4th year as a faculty myself as an assistant professor. And so I really benefited from senior mentors bringing this opportunity to my attention. So this is great that we have this because I had no idea that that was even that the supplement was an option. And so the reason it was brought to my attention is because at the time I obviously had a new grant, and so I was recruiting some students, and one of the students, the PhD students I was looking at was from an underrepresented community. And so the program director said, hey, have you thought about using this, contacting, see if you have a parent award that would be eligible for a diversity supplement, and then that you could utilize to support her and advance her kind of career development. And so I looked into it, contacted my program officer. It was, so the DB2 is one of the Common Fund programs. And so I got, that was assigned to NICHD, and so National Institute of Child Health and Development. And so I had gotten conflicting, I would say, advice and just, you have to find the right person to talk to, I would say, because my program officer was like, well, your program is out of the Common Fund. We don't know that they'll do a diversity supplement. And so just make sure that you really talk to, and because each case, it seems, is unique. It ended up that I was eligible and they allowed me to submit. And so the funding from that, actually half of it came from NICHD, and then the other half came from the Common Fund for that supplement. So it supplemented the student for, we were kind of in an interesting scenario. We were supposed to get 3 years of funding, and then right at the start of the 2nd year, NICHD revised their diversity supplement kind of guidelines and rules and said, and put a cap on 2 years. So we actually got cut down to 2 years. So that was a little disappointing, but it allowed funding for the students. I really relied in terms of developing the proposal. the student was involved in terms of like career development and discussing. She hadn't started yet. So that was the other thing that I was told for my institute is this had to be used as a recruiting tool. So it could not be used to support a student that was currently in my lab or a postdoc. So you have to, so I had to kind of weigh in terms of developing the research side of things and work. I probably did 70% of the writing for that, and then had the student, I worked with her and kind of said, hey, this is how we're developing the scientific aspects, and discussed and really kind of figured out which areas of the project we thought that she could synergize and kind of discuss through some ideas that I had. It was also, since it was a DP2, I didn't have specific hard aims. It was kind of more of a project idea. So I had a little bit more flexibility in terms of a unique focused area that she could work on. And then we really worked together, and I utilized some of my colleagues that had successful diversity supplements in terms of their career development plans. And so I worked with the student, a prospective student, on that in terms of being able to identify her strengths, weaknesses, and where we would want to kind of grow. And so we had funding, like I said, for her stipend, and I think each year it was about 60 to 70 a K, because then we also had some funds for her to do some attending conferences and workshops for career development early on in her career. So I think I would say, in terms of how it impacted her career, I mean, it provided an opportunity. I was going to pick her up no matter what. So I was committed to supporting this student regardless if we got it or not. I think maybe she had a little bit more flexibility in terms of the career development opportunities she would have had early on. But I don't know that it necessary. I think if we were more towards, probably could have utilized it more towards the end of her graduate career, but she's graduated in a successful postdoc now and looking at continuing academia. So I'd say overall it achieved the goals for what we were looking for.
Fabulous. Thanks. Dr. Snyder-Mackler.
Hello, thanks for having me here. I'm Noah Snyder-Mackler. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Life Sciences in the Center for Evolutionary Medicine. I have 2 active administrative supplements to the diversity supplements, neither of whom are here at ASU. So this is part of a R01 I have through the National Institute on Aging. One of the students is one of the awardees is a graduate student at the University of Puerto Rico who I'm mentoring through part of the project. And another is a Indigenous postdoctoral scholar at one of my collaborating institutions, NYU. They're both 2-year supplements, so for the same parent award, and they were both awarded around the same time in like late summer, early fall 2020. I want to address, so I think Shelby brought this up, that that you only had 1 shot. We were able to resubmit for the PhD student. So I think that might be institute specific. So we put in a supplement before I moved here from the University of Washington in the fall of 2019. And that was declined, but then they encouraged us to resubmit it when we got here. And so we resubmitted it. So that one was then awarded. The budgets are really, really straightforward for, postdocs and grad students. It covers standard things, plus as Matt mentioned, it covers travel and training opportunities. So the student from the University of Puerto Rico is going to be coming here at some point, after the pandemic to gain some more training experience in my lab. I think it's been an absolutely unbelievably huge help to both of them, because it allows them to be fully funded and not have any other responsibilities and not have to worry about other responsibilities for 2 years, which is a huge relief. I don't know how it'll affect their future success, but I'm sure it's going to be beneficial. It's a line on their CV where they were awarded this relatively competitive fellowship supplement. They both led the design of their proposals and writing with heavy input from me and my co-PIs. One thing to note, so on another award that I have, a UL1 award through mental health, I was hoping to get one of my postdocs a diversity supplement, but she's currently already funded on that award as a postdoc. And so she's ineligible to get a diversity supplement. They're ineligible for the diversity supplement on that same award. So as soon as you have someone funded on your current award, they're no longer eligible for a diversity supplement on that award in the future. I wanted to make sure that was noted. And so the fact that the two diversity supplements that I have are students who are not here at ASU would hopefully hint that you should all be applying for them if you are not the lead institution, or if you're collaborating with someone, or if you have students that you're kind of mentoring, even though you're not their primary mentor at another institution, because they're really, really great opportunities. I think that's it.
Short and sweet. So thank you for that. So you can see from the breadth and depth of experience and diversity, we can open it up for questions and answers from those in attendance. If you have something. I did put in the link. Go for it.
So thanks everyone for your detailed introductions. Something is still not clear to me, and it came up in different contexts in everyone's introductions. And on my reading of the announcement, it was much more along the lines of what Dr. Stabenfeld said, where it's sort of emphasizing recruitment of an individual. But a couple of people said that the person who was funded on the supplement had a large part in writing it. So does that mean they're already in the group? Like how do you reconcile, like, this has to be for recruitment, but you also have to know the person well enough that they're in your group and able to write the supplement application? Or can it be an individual that is not at all related to your research, you don't even know who they are, but you're writing the supplement because you want to bring someone in under this award? I don't know, does that make sense?
Who'd like to field that one?
I can.
I was going to say,
go ahead.
Or I'll provide a little input. So I do have colleagues that are in larger labs, and I know what they. So I think there's a few different strategies. So if you have a lab that you have multiple grants, I know that people hire people in on one grant and then have them write diversity supplements for another grant. So they're kind of almost grant hopping. I don't know that that is advocated. And so that's where I would say, me as a new professor, I was kind of in that scenario where I was not able to have, basically I only had one big grant. And so I couldn't do that. So I did have to use it as a recruiting tool. But like I said, I was going to hire that person regardless, and knew that I only had kind of that summer to get it together. And so that's why I worked with her a little bit more, I think, on the experimental design. But that was my experience. So I'll let Dr. Ruman.
Yeah, I'll just, my experience is that it sort of looks a lot of different ways. From a recruitment standpoint, I know that NIH wants to see that you don't already have the funding to support this student, that this additional funding would allow them to have this experience and this training. Now that could be bringing in a brand new student at that point, somebody who's not a part of it. But like in our case, it was funding for this student is going to run out. There's no additional funding. So to maintain their training and to enhance it, this would be needed. So that was the justification that we provided. And I believe that actually justification goes in the cover letter. And so you might want to check with your program officer about that. But that's what we were advised to do, to write it that way. I think it'd be very difficult to write one if you don't have someone in mind, because it's really about trying to create a learning experience for that student to meet their needs. So if you don't know who they are, then it's hard to know what their needs are. So, but certainly having a student who is considering the institution, et cetera, and somebody lined up that isn't there would be a good justification, I would imagine.
And can I add we didn't know this person at all. And similarly, she was going to be out of a job if this hadn't materialized. And just to echo what Matt said, it would have been hard to write this is so tailored to them and their mentoring plan and their needs and their expertise and their interests. So it'd be hard to just kind of write it in the absence of that.
Thank you, everyone.
I know that
I just want to add one thing real quick.
Go for it. Go.
I didn't know that this could be used as a recruiting tool. I think that's really, really fantastic. And I would just say that I think it's, God, what was I going to add? Now I'm blanking here. So just telling you.
It would be really great because you could recruit someone.
Yeah, no, it's you could recruit someone. No, I think it's really hard to write it without that. I think the best thing you can do is just talk to your program officer about okay, can I do this? Because the turnaround for these is not always that quick. It's usually a lot shorter than an F31 or an F32. It's usually within a couple of months, but I don't know if that's enough time for you to decide on accepting a grad student to your lab or not. So I would really just talk to the program officer like with any of these questions, because it seems like it's all really variable and institute specific.
I know Dr. Kwong unmuted and remuted, and so I want to make sure that we captured him, and then Dr. Gherkin after Dr. Kwong. Did you have a question for the panel?
Yeah, let me see if I, is that muted? I just wonder if I know a student on another project, whether or not I can support him on this different project with this supplementary support. So there's one Hispanic student that worked with us on a different project. Yeah,
we heard you. So it is, I think that the information from Dr. Staubenfeld was that, yes, if you had a student funded on on another project, then you could technically move him or her to another project if you were awarded a diversity supplement, correct? Am I hearing you correctly? I might have misunderstood.
Yeah, I think again, you have to make the case of why there would need to be that shift, and how, and that's kind of, you'd frame essentially why that project and why they would need to be supported under this mechanism through that grant. And, you know, if it's a different line of research that aligns better with the student's interests, or advances, you know, kind of diversifies their skill set. I think you could, you know, there's different ways that people do it. And I think, like I said, I know some people that I would say, I think game the system a little bit, but it also is utilized to support trainees. So I think, yeah, so it sounds like you probably could, but I would recommend, you know, really kind of looking at the heart of what this supplement is for, and, you know, to get more diversity in our workforce. And so I think if that achieves that goal, then I think you probably would be eligible. But talking to your program officer would be the best place to start.
Sure, thank you.
Dr. Anderson, can I go real quick to the question Dr. Gherkin
Absolutely
had his hand up? Okay, then I'll come back to you.
Hi, sorry I was late. So I had one previous experience supporting a student from applied math that was a successful application, and then he completed his PhD. It's a little bit different there because those students often will be admitted with a guaranteed TA one way or another, and then they can be moved on to a grant, you know, if you have funding. And because that student was on a TA before, the issue of, you know, are they moving from just one grant hopping, or were they previously funded on the grant was not an issue. I'm wondering if that's something that we can actually, I know, of course, TAs are limited in souls, and there'll always be battles over TAs, but in the event that someone has a graduate student, like a new graduate student, they are applying for or planning to apply for diversity fellowship, if putting that student onto a TA to keep them from having to be on the same grant that they would be writing the application on would be a useful strategy to make sure the student retains eligibility for the fellowship. Also, you know, it's probably, compared to some other mechanisms for funding students, somewhat higher yield. So I think it'd be maybe a good investment also for them to be on a TA, because it'd be likely, you know, maybe more likely than the average student to be funded in the future.
I think this might be a good time for us to think through, to the point about how we're supporting these students long-term, not just short-term. These are 2-year grants, and I think it's a disservice for us to not think about how the institution might be able to support these. These are fully funded, fully F&A, as opposed to the Fs, right? So the university is recovering all of the F&As. Granted, they're not big grants, but they're still recovering, 50 whatever percent. And so I think that really, what we did in ours is we just basically said, hey, anything that isn't covered for Armando's training will be covered for this, and we will make sure that he is supported regardless of this grant. And I think that actually bodes very well in the spirit of these awards. And so I think that that's something we might be able to float up to the higher ups for our commitment to diversifying the workforce. Is that, yeah, I mean, Richard, it's a good point about TAs, but really, I mean, that's a struggle for those candidates. Hey, we're going back and forth between TA and RA. And we actually had a fight once Armando got the F31. They wanted to cut the resources. They wanted to actually have him come out of pocket to pay tuition. And we're like, no, like, what's the point of this? And so, because those Fs are reduced in terms of the resources.
No, we had that battle with F31 as well with another student. I hope I think that's been resolved for everyone else, because it wasn't that long ago that almost no one from the department was getting F31. So I think that was just a growing pain for souls.
It was a growing pain for us as well. I mean, I see Lisa and Deb from our end on it, and they were huge champions and advocates because we had to push, and then we had to go back to our program officer and say, hey, you guys are going to cut a student because they got an F31.
Yeah.
And so the grants manager at NIDDK had to be pushed. So
yeah, we had a student who's going to lose health insurance for getting an F31. It was pretty strange. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about long-term support on the TA. Just like, let's say a student is a first or a second-year student, and the 2 years probably can't bridge them all the way to graduation. But I just wouldn't want to see someone lose eligibility because the PI had one grant. They really wanted to support the student, and they had no choice but to put them on to the grant that they were going to write the fellowship on. That's the situation I was trying to avoid.
Yeah, agreed.
So it sounds like some strategy is needed when designing the approach. So in recognition of that, if that's okay, can I move to Dr. Anderson? Or yeah, okay, Dr. Anderson.
Yeah.
Who, by the way, I want to give a shout out to who brought this to our attention and kind of pushed for this. So she is the reason we are here today, just as an FYI.
This has been a great session. It always seems to me that part of the challenge of these grants, right, is that you have to have, which you guys have all mentioned, that you have to have the funding with enough runtime so that you can have somebody on it. You have to have somebody already identified who meets the criteria for the diversity supplement. You have to already have them funded on some other source that is going to run out, that is not detracting from what they're planning to do. And then you have to time it so that they can get the funding to support their career, path. And so one of the questions for us, maybe from people who were here, is, are there ways that we as an institution can support the community infrastructure to be able to help facilitate these? And both, but more importantly, as you mentioned, to build that community of scholars in a long-term way so that we can, enhance the success of our student population. And it seems to me one of the major sticking points we have is having this pre-existing funding, whether this is graduate student or postdoc level, having somebody in, being able to bridge them in order to be able to apply for these funds, right? And that's, it seems is a common theme that I'm hearing from this. When I think about some of the logistics, that seems to be a major sticking point, and maybe we need to think about that from an institutional level a little bit. And the second thing I'm hearing is, okay, what happens next? Can we actually create a systematic mentorship, program that would really help them? We have had various diversity funding opportunities, and like we've had IMSD and SOLS and others, but that we don't have right now. And the question is, how do we create this longitudinal education opportunities for these students? And I'm really just opening it up to the board.
Yeah, I just want to echo Dr. Anderson. I think that and I think Dr. Gherkin and a couple others mentioned this before, is having some sort of mechanism to bring students in or postdocs in, and looking at more of kind of bridge or I'd almost say like, kickstart funding to first support, bring them in for a year or two. But then I would say those types of mechanisms, like I said, I think there needs to be a long-term vision, because what happens if somebody doesn't get that funding? And so we need to make sure that there is commitment for these trainees' careers in the long term. And so I think right now I don't know of any mechanism for that here at ASU. I think that would be fantastic if there was. I think that is a big hole that we need to push on and try to figure out how to address it.
It seems to me also with a lot of these mentorship programs and grants that they really favor large labs, large groups, that have multiple funding sources, that have multiple, established investigators, that have 10 prior trainees in academics and things like that. And the problem that I see with this is that just favors continuation of establishment and the entrenchment of whether it's bias, whether it's much more challenging for junior faculty to succeed in getting any type of mentorship awards. And I don't know if that's true. That's my perception of it, because every time you get to, how many prior students have you had? How many prior mentees have you had? Where have they landed? And junior faculty won't be able to succeed with this and often get dinged on the mentorship plan in part because of that. And anyway, I don't know if that's also the perception that comes also with these diversity grants.
Dr. Gerken, would you like to respond? Or
Well, I was going to say I agree. I mean, I partnered on this diversity fellowship application with Sharon Crook in math, as a senior faculty member, and I'm sure I doubt I would have been successful if I had applied alone. So it was. I mean, I'm sure she was largely. We all contributed to helping to develop the students' proposal and working with them and mentoring them, and we were both on his committee. But I'm sure this actual application itself absolutely required to have a co-mentor and a senior person. At least I think it did.
Would the people who have current diversity supplements or prior diversity supplements be willing to advise other faculty who are trying to look for these beyond the context of this meeting? I think there's just so much institutional knowledge and personal knowledge that you all have gained from working through this process. We want to make sure that we adequately capture that and share that for people who are looking to get there.
Karen, it's a great point. I don't want to speak for everybody. I'd be happy to. I think this is really part of our mission that we should be focusing on. And then Faye, I would also say, to maybe my and Richard point, you could also get the folks from the, how do I say that? I'll say the term wrong. Ours is RISE, ORSPA, whatever it was used to be called, but Knowledge Enterprise, to get those folks talking together too, because I think there's some wisdom that could be garnered there based upon both Richard's and our experience that we now have. I think that this is a great opportunity for us to move forward and then talk to the deans. I mean, there's F&A that's associated with these.
so
Oh,
go ahead, Gwen.
Oh, I was just going to say, to sort of reiterate what Dr. Anderson was saying, the idea of sort of the pipeline is kind of cliche, but I think it works from an institutional perspective. We think about and to sort of remind everyone that this opportunity actually does start at the high school level. You could be bringing in high school and continuing, and bringing them all the way up through that. So just something I want to remind everyone.
Thanks, Faye. Just happy to do that, Karen, as your request. And we hadn't done one of these. We weren't aware of this mechanism. We struggled to get an example, and just we're really operating in the dark with not a whole lot of help from that. Our PO was helpful, but we really needed support from the specific PO and NCI. So I think willingness to share examples would be really helpful.
One thing that it sounds like their messaging on this might be helped at the university level too. So as soon as somebody gets an R01, maybe that conversation should start with them. Hey, did you know that you could get, this should be a standard thing. Did you know you're eligible for one of these? And if you're interested, connecting folks with the resource would be great.
Yeah, and keeping in mind so like I just got an R1 that just started. And so I'm like, it's graduate recruiting season. And so I'm definitely keeping an eye out and saying, is there somebody that matches that I could possibly bring in and recruit and kind of do what I did the last time? And so I think I'm aware of that and know that it's a possibility. So I agree that just bring it to people's attention and saying, hey, this is an opportunity that you can take advantage of, particularly kind of in your first, like I said, you have to have 2 years in your grant, but just kind of keep an eye out for potential candidates. So
the flip side of that is also that if you're collaborating with someone who is a PI at another institution, it is possible, but you have a student that is working on that project. It is this concept of co-mentoring and co-mentoring across institutions. I don't know how successful that is for getting those grants. That's the hard way to do it. But it's also an opportunity. So if it's not your own proposal, but you have a student who fits within that context of that collaboration, that might work as well.
Good morning, this is Michaela. I just wanted to comment maybe from the other perspective. So I transitioned to ASU in 2018, I believe, and I had reached out to our dean at the Watts College for, and I'll look at Gabe. Gabe knows a little bit about my experience in terms of crafting out a position as an assistant research faculty with the idea of potentially applying for a supplement to get on a project and I think just help me with the transition back into academia from a government position that I had in New York City. And what was interesting from that perspective is as a PhD, what I had to do was go to NIH Reporter and look at everyone at ASU who had an R01 and reach out to, to really promote both my skill set and interests and potentially, using this as a mechanism to help me go back into research, go back into the academic setting. Worked a little bit with Dr. Scheibe, kind of thinking about, what opportunities might exist. All to say, I think there's, I don't want to lose sight of people or individuals who are maybe currently staff and or faculty who are in these non-traditional, non-tenure type of positions that could particularly take advantage of these supplements to help craft that career pathway. And I was able to apply. I think it kind of went through the normal trajectory of how these grants are reviewed. But all to say, I think we can expand on the opportunity here. That's not just, I agree, high school, college, undergraduate, graduate level, PhD, postdoc, but there are a group of, I would say, interested folks, staff who would particularly look at this as a mechanism for advancing their own research skills, contributing to the scientific work in this non-traditional trajectory. So I just wanted to kind of note that as a personal experience, and certainly something that I'd like to continue exploring, and that was one way of having done that.
That's really inspirational. Thank you so much for that. So we're at the hour, and that's a perfect way, in my opinion, to end. So what I hear is that maybe we had intended to have this as an annual event, and we will continue to do that. We are recording it. We will send it out to those who have interest. If you get the recording, feel free to send it to people who have interest in your networks. We'll go ahead and schedule the next student-focused or recipient-focused event. And then I'm sure that Dr. Anderson will motivate to do a smaller focus group, working group type of thing. So thank you again for our panelists, the research development staff, and everyone who attended today and learned a little bit more about this opportunity. Thank you and have a great Wednesday.